We are recording this session today. This will be available for those who were unable to attend. We'll post this on the district website here eventually. And this is a part of our curriculum. So in other words, this is part of the process as we are rolling out the youth protection policy. There will be additional opportunities for your youth protection officer and for members to learn more about how we can protect our youth and ourselves. So at this point in time, I'm going to turn this over to John Reyes, our committee chair, and he will take us through what we're going to do today.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Let me add my good morning and welcome to everyone. We appreciate your getting up. We also, however, appreciate your interest in youth, and we also very much appreciate your interest in their safety. In Rotary, youth safety is obviously a focus, and the reason for that is fairly obvious. Rotary has a substantial involvement with youth. In this district, RILA alone has over 300 members. Four-way speech contest involves usually more than a dozen students, and it's an off-site event, if you will, at a university that runs almost a week. We have a well-developed and active exchange program. Clubs are involved in a wide variety of activities. The Akron Club has a camp for children with special needs. Many of you do a Student of the Month program, and so forth. In that environment, safety is a key concern and a key goal. Fact is that the district has had a very well-developed youth safety system for youth exchange for a long time. All host families and anybody who lives in their house is thoroughly vetted, background checks are done. Participating youth are trained into the kind of activity that they're not to be exposed to and what to do about it if it occurs. On a lot of our other youth programming in the district, however, challenges remain. To be candid with you, the district is a full 10 years or more behind many of the districts in the U.S. California, for instance, and Washington, virtually every district has been using the program we're going to cover for you today for a decade or more. So what we're doing isn't new, it's tested, it works, but we need to catch up. RI, frankly, Rotary International has added an emphasis to its long-standing mandate regarding youth. Our district, to be candid with you, had a difficult encounter with a youth safety matter just before I became district governor-elect, and we worked on that for over 2 years before it was brought to a resolution. Further, if we needed anything further, RI insurance rates, which cover our district, cover our clubs, cover you as members and officers, are going up. And safety concerns are a key reason for that increase. It's not hard to understand why. If you follow the news even casually, you'll know that the Boy Scouts at this point in time are in a Chapter 11 bankruptcy proceeding. And the latest report I received on my bankruptcy reporting services, their settlement total now will top $1 billion for over 82,000 claims. The Mormon Church is involved in a settlement process that's probably going to reach or exceed $250 million. USC is involved in a process where the payout will be at least $1.1 billion. Rotary International's insurance underwriters are obviously cognizant of that, and they see a potential payout for each of the 7,528 clubs in the 150 districts that the U.S. insurance program covers. In that process, they have looked at and reviewed, the underwriters have reviewed Rotary International's youth guidelines and training. A critical part of their report, I'm going to quote, it's only about a sentence long, but I think we all need to be aware of it and understand it. And that underwriting review generated the following statement. This means that adopting the youth protection policies set forth in the Rotary Youth Protection Guide for tutoring programs, Interact, RILA, and a youth exchange program, and any other activities involving youth is essential to maintaining the broad insurance coverage that has historically been available under the program. And by the way, it has been an extremely good insurance program. It functions for us as first dollar coverage, if you're familiar with that, although I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. But there has been in this insurance year, 2021, 2022, one major change already. For those of you who are aware, we now have a claims made policy, not an occurrence policy. That in and of itself tightens up and potentially significantly on a claim. It's beyond the scope of this presentation, but you need to be aware that if you think you have a claim, youth protection or otherwise, you need to turn it in, even though it hasn't come to you in a classic form like a letter or a complaint in a court. Because with a claims made policy, if you don't turn the claim in during the year of the policy itself, that coverage will not be available to you should you be sued a year or two later. It's these kinds of claims that cause that kind of a reaction on the part of insurance carriers. In the broader context, the state of Ohio actually started acting on increasing levels of youth protection and encouraging that way back in March 22, actually, of 2001. A statutory scheme was adopted by the legislature and it was effective on that date. You can find it in Ohio Revised Code sections 574 and 575. For our purposes, any volunteer, which means any club member, who has unsupervised access to youth, and that's a defined term in the statutes, and I won't go down that rabbit hole in detail here. But if you have that, then that volunteer shall, not may, shall be told that they can be fingerprinted and a criminal background check can be run at any time. All right, a failure to give that warning and to actually run the check results in a club, the district, and or the involved club members losing the limited statutory immunity that the legislature otherwise put into place. So with that background, and if you take a look at what the district does with youth exchange versus what the district and most clubs do with other activities, the challenge becomes somewhat clear. The bar we set and the bar that we meet in youth exchange is a high one. A lawyer would call it a standard of care. Many of our other activities historically have not functioned at that high a level for safety purposes. So we're to the point now we're going to close that gap. We'll level the playing field, whatever cliche you want to use. So we're going to implement the policy. It's on the district website. If you have trouble accessing it, Cheryl Warren can help you with that. There are some very good additional materials, and a lot of them available on the RI website, particularly in the Learning Center, and both Cheryl and Ryan Knotts can help you with that. But we all need to understand that the district policy is in fact patterned after policies that have been successfully used in multiple districts over an extended period of time. We're not going to ask you to memorize that policy, that's too much, but you do need to have a very good working understanding of it. It's designed to help you spot issues, plan events in a manner that would avoid a problem, and a variety of other things. So if you'll bear with us, work with us, we will much appreciate it. We will all benefit. I certainly am grateful. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan, who will introduce our next speaker as we move through a presentation on the plan or the policy itself, some future training matters, and some scenarios that will help you understand how it applies. Ryan?
All right, thank you, John. So our next speaker, Fran Zettel, who is our district insurance chair, will now take us through more specifics of the policy and answer some of those questions about what we're looking at implementing.
Good morning. Can everyone see that all right? Okay. Good morning, Brian, and thank you. And thank you to everyone who's attending today. This morning, we're going to be rolling out the district youth protection policy. Our objective this morning is to give you an overview of the district policy. It's important for you to remember as we go through this also that there will definitely be more additional training. The slides we're showing are titled, and many of them refer to pages and sections in the Youth Protection Manual. Hopefully this will be a helpful reference since we'll be giving you a lot of information this morning. These guidelines are a significant enhancement to our current procedures. We will provide an overview of key professions, key provisions and identify district and club responsibilities, as well as resources available for youth protection. Our core values are to respect all people, youth, young adults, and fellow members. Thus, every activity conducted is intended to be free of abuse and harassment. Undoubtedly, you're going to have a lot of questions, so let's get started. The Rotary International Statement of Conduct is on page 12 of the manual. Rotary values have been the foundation for our great organization, which has grown worldwide. Working with youth adds another layer of social responsibilities. Children and young adults lack maturity, and it's our duty as leaders to safeguard and protect them from harm, both physical and emotional. All activities sponsored by Rotary will take place in an environment that is free of abuse and harassment of any kind. The Youth Protection Policy outlines consistent and supportive incident management that is in compliance with Rotary International directives. These procedures will greatly enhance youth safety, protect the club members from allegations, and enhance the liability protection for our clubs. This policy aligns with Rotary International standards and legal reporting requirements. Proper training is key. All individuals involved with all youth programs must read, understand, and follow the policies in this manual. Compliance is required and is supervised by the district governor. All clubs are monitored for all youth programs. The YPP, or the Youth Protection Manual, includes definitions of terms, programs, groups, and positions. Learning these will help you determine the level of training needed for Rotarians and volunteers and the steps to take to avoid problems. Two key definitions to understand are casual contact with youth versus continued contact. Volunteers that are selling tickets or handling registration at a single event will have different criteria to meet for training than those working with an Interact club. Understanding these definitions will facilitate the steps you need to take to get your volunteers properly vetted. We also see the need to protect our club members from unsubstantiated allegations. The club's responsibilities for documentation of incidents alleging harassment or abuse are listed in the procedures. It's important that all the steps are followed. While there is insurance protection from third-party liability claims, it's critical to have accurate documentation to defend the club and their members. It's never pleasant to be involved in these situations, but there's a level of comfort knowing that all of the procedures were followed. Insurance premiums, as John mentioned, are on the increase. More plaintiff activity, juror views towards social and corporate accountability, and large settlements are being felt in the insurance markets. Large sex abuse settlements are also driving costs for programs that involve any youth interactions. Adopting, understanding, and following youth protection policies set forth by Rotary International and the district are essential to maintaining the broad coverage that's been available under the current insurance program and keeping our clubs solvent. Clubs with youth programs must provide confirmation of compliance to the district governor. The compliance statement is signed by the club president, president-elect, and youth protection officer. Signing and sending this statement confirms your understanding and agreement to operate your youth programs in accordance with district and RI policies. The level of training needed for Rotarians and volunteers depends upon the level of youth contact. Again, important to understand the difference between continued contact and casual contact. But training is required for any club that has any youth involvement, and there are no exceptions to that. Clubs involved with Rotary Youth Exchange are required to have training And there is an additional level of responsibility for learning materials, applications, websites, and community resources. The responsibilities at the district level. The organizational structure responsibility starts with the district governor and filters down to the clubs. Each position has defined responsibilities and is listed in the manual. At the district level, the district governor oversees the policy. The district youth protection oversees the clubs for compliance. For non-criminal complaints, the investigating committee hears the complaint and recommends action. The district cooperates with all law enforcement agencies, child protective services, and legal investigations. The Standing Committee for Youth Protection reviews and makes recommendations of changes in policies if needed. The district Rotary Youth Exchange Chair oversees Rotary Youth Exchange. At the club level, the president oversees the policy and appoints the club youth protection officer. If a youth protection officer is not chosen, the responsibility defaults to the club president. The club president approves members for a youth protection committee on recommendation of the club youth protection officer. The club youth protection officer, referred to as the YPO, coordinates training with district leadership as well as club membership. Youth protection officer may form a youth protection committee if needed, and you have to decide what makes sense for your club given the projects that you're involved in. If the club participates in Rotary Youth Exchange, the club youth protection officer also coordinates with the district Rotary Youth Exchange chair to track screened youth exchange volunteers and their documentation status. All Rotarians and non-Rotarian volunteers working with youth must complete the online youth protection awareness training. All volunteers, Rotarian or not, with continued contact with youth will be required to undergo additional screening, which includes an interview, completing a volunteer application, providing personal references, and undergoing a criminal background check. The only acceptable criminal background check will be done within the youth volunteer management system. Clubs will incur an estimated cost of $18 for the criminal background check, and only volunteers with continued contact will need a background check. Any individual with a history of abuse, whether it's domestic, sexual, or any harassment, is ineligible for membership or participation in any Rotary program. Clubs with Rotary Youth Exchanges must meet district and OE, Ohio Erie multi-district guidelines. This applies to all participants, including students and the adult residents of the host home. Parents and guardians of potential candidates are interviewed to determine the student's suitability for the program. At the club level, youth protection leaders will be trained by the District Youth Protection Committee. Training will include recognizing sexual abuse and harassment and how and to whom these incidents are reported. Training and completion records are maintained by the club youth protection officer or the district youth protection officer and recorded in the youth volunteer management system. And you're going to be hearing more later about that topic. Student participants in some programs such as Interact or RILA will be trained as approved by the district governor. On page 15 of the manual is a chart you can easily refer to listing the various roles and their requirements. The Club Youth Exchange Officer and Youth Protection Committee members must participate in the youth protection training offered by the district. The Club Youth Protection Officer attends training as soon as possible after assuming office and annually thereafter. The RI Committee provides special training on Rotary Youth Exchange programs. The procedures for handling allegations of abuse or harassment are outlined in the manual. There's an incident report and handling guidelines you can use to help you get your thoughts in order. Most importantly, all allegations are immediately acknowledged and referred to the club youth protection officer or president. Any complainant alleging sexual or physical abuse will be immediately reported to law enforcement. Complaints involving RI are reported to the district RI chair, who assumes the duties of the club YPO. Non-criminal complaints will be handled at the club level. Immediately acknowledge the report, stay calm, protect the youth, and assure them privacy but not confidentiality. All complaints are reported to the district governor within 72 hours and should be followed up in writing. The district level committee will review the complaint, the club's findings. If needed, they'll investigate further and they'll make recommendations. Again, criminal complaints are reported first to law enforcement. Rotary Youth Exchange student travel in and out of the district requires permission and procedures governed predominantly by the district Rotary Youth Exchange chair. All other youth travel requires permission from parents, guardians, and possibly proof of insurance for medical contingencies. Detailed itineraries will be distributed to leadership and parents and guardians. Drivers for youth will provide door-to-door service, delivering them home to their parents or to their guardians. An additional level of supervision is required for youth overnight events. Only qualified volunteers may supervise these events. Refer back to the previous guidelines in the manual regarding permission, releases, itineraries, and proof of insurance. Okay, now that you have the big picture, let's get started with what you need to do. And that would be each club should review their events that involve youth and analyze the extent of contact with youth. Is it casual contact or is it going to be continued contact? Is it a mixture? Determine the level of training you'll need for the volunteers, and then use the tools and resources in the manual to help make decisions about managing your event. Okay, now that you have your events and the level of volunteer with youth, appoint a youth protection officer and decide if a youth protection committee is going to be needed. Review the district youth protection policy document, report the club youth protection officer to the district, and submit a completed and signed compliance agreement. You'll also find that there are other documents that you can look for that will be of great assistance to you. And there's quite a few summations for you within the district policies. On pages 13 and 14, exhibits A and B, there's a very handy submission of the policies and procedures. Pages 15 through 22 have some helpful forms for risk assessment, incident guidelines, and understanding the flow of the volunteer applications. The Youth Protection Policies and Procedures Manual is a detailed step-by-step guide that will guide you in your interactions with youth programs. Familiarize yourself with Rotary International Insurance website, which has useful risk management tips and procedures to safely holding your event, as well as some sample releases. My Rotary also includes materials to help you with youth interactions. So in summary, this is one manual that you'll have to read and have readily available for reference. We've given you a lot of information this morning, and there's more detail in the manual providing step-by-step instructions. I also want to emphasize this is just an overview of the program. We will be providing additional in-depth training outlining the specifics of these sessions and outlining the specifics at future sessions. My viewpoint, coming from my years of working in insurance, is that a large part of risk management is avoiding problems. Be aware that incidents can involve youth and an adult or youth-on-youth interaction. Bring common sense to every program that involves youth. Avoid one-on-one youth contact. think of the resources needed to supervise an event, and make sure you're properly staffed and trained. And with that, I thank you for your time, and turn it back over to Ryan.
Thank you, Fran.
Back.
So for a lot of those, I included this in the chat earlier. I'll include it again, but we have the link to the District Youth Protection Manual and Policy that is on the district website. So as far as that is available, and certainly a great resource to kind of guide, we're giving a high level overview at this point, and we're going to address a number of the questions that were brought up in the chat here later. But next, as far as the thing that we're planning to do here is to review some potential situations that you may or may not encounter, and how best to address that. And then also, what does that really reference as far as the policy is concerned? So I do have a few individuals who are going to help me with this. Chelsea Talty, our district interact chair, and then John Reyes, our committee chair, past district governor, and myself will kind of roll us through that a little bit here. So scenario number one, Casey, your student of the month, is in attendance at a Rotary Club meeting. Casey's there to receive their certificate and award for being student of the month. One of the Rotarians at the table where you and Casey happen to be seating starts to tell a risque joke. What if that Rotarian completes the joke? What are some of the issues here that are brought up just in the situation alone that need to be addressed, and how will you address them? And we're looking for feedback and answers in the chat. But again, what kind of situation is this bringing up in regards to youth safety, and how should that be addressed? So I have a tactfully redirect. Why are we telling risque jokes at Rotary meetings anyway? I would address the joke with the individual person after the meeting as well. And then I have the question because they are fun. I know we have a lot of people here this morning. Shut it down and remind the club that a minor is in attendance. The Rotarian needs to be addressed. Interrupt and ask if this is a story they would tell their own child. All right. So these are things that happen, as far as in how are we looking to represent Rotary. But as we think about through the situation, this is the definition of sexual harassment. And then how do we respond to a situation like that? I also have the response here of stopping the speaker before they complete the joke. Remind the club president to share our standards and expectations with the whole club. Should let the student know that this is not appropriate. So reinforcing what's acceptable and what's not. Yeah, so as far as you're hitting on some of the things that we should be doing to address this, this should not be happening in any situation, but stopping the Rotarian, informing them it's not appropriate. Removing that Rotarian from the table to further interaction with the student. Apologize to everyone and tell them this is not appropriate. Apologize to the student, let them know that this is not what Rotary represents. Approach the Rotarian after the meeting and ask them why they felt it was appropriate to tell the joke. These are all responses that you could take as far as to deal with a situation like this. Approach the leadership of the club and let them know your concerns. So raising that awareness. But these are some ways as far as on a potential scenario that you and your club may or may not encounter as far as how to address that. And we're going to get into a few more scenarios here that are going to take this a little bit deeper and highlight the importance of a youth safety policy.
Ryan, if I could add a quick comment before we move to 2, something to understand is and you've referenced it, there is a definition of sexual harassment. We do have to be aware of that. It does apply, and it applies beyond just youth activities, and we do need to pay attention to it. You may not have a single answer, you may not have a perfect answer, but it requires some thought and it requires some attention. Thank you.
Thanks, John. So I'm going to call on Chelsea here to lead us through scenario number 2.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chelsea Talty. I'm the District Interact Chairperson. And like Ryan said, I'm going to take you through scenario number 2. So George is a student in your Interact Club that your Rotary Club sponsors. He's a senior, he plays football, he's a student council president, and he's been accepted to multiple colleges. 2 female sophomore students who are also members of the Interact Club approach you one day and say that George has been sexually harassing them and won't stop despite their repeated insistence that they are not interested. They say he's made sexually suggestive comments, asked them out on multiple dates, and called them inappropriate names behind their back. Both girls feel very uncomfortable around George and are considering quitting the Interact Club because of it. Now, as Ryan said before, we're definitely looking for your thoughts on this. Please, in the chat, what would you do in this situation? If you learned about George and these 2 girls, one of the girls reports it to you, what would you do? What are some of the steps that we need to take in this situation?
You know, Chelsea, while those are coming into the chat, or hopefully are coming into the chat, when you start to deal with an Interact Club and you are in a school setting, there is another whole layer of complexity. And I suspect that our attendees this morning understand that you do teach in a high school. You do also head up our Interact program, but it is a complex environment. And you do have to make sure that you're effectively coordinating with your school and its administration and its requirements.
Yes, thank you, John. I see a couple of people are answering in the chat. Report the student, report to the school counselor. Yes, absolutely. Make sure the Interact Club sponsor is aware. Yes, if there's a faculty advisor, we absolutely would want to do that. Investigate the incidents, question George potentially, separate from the Rotary organization, begin an investigation, make sure we take it seriously. Yes, these are all very good things. Confront unacceptable behavior, interview each party. There are legal liabilities. Yes, absolutely. Interview both girls with the Youth Protection Committee, address the situation with George, talk to George, tell him he's no longer welcome at Interact, report to school admin. Yes, all good. Someone should get George's version of the allegations. Absolutely. Inform the district and insurance company about the potential claim. Yes, good. So as you can see, there are several things that we need to take into consideration here, such as harassment, allegation reporting, investigating. And again, this would count as a situation where sexual harassment is involved. So at this point, as Rotarians, what can we do when we learn about this potential issue that we are having in one of our Interact clubs? Well, as we've said, we definitely want to make sure that we are reporting to both our school administration as well as your club's Rotary Youth Protection Officer. This is most certainly something that we need to make the correct parties aware of as soon as possible. We will have a youth protection investigative committee. So we will run our own investigation through Rotary, but the school will also want to run their own investigation as well. So we need to make sure that our investigative committee will be working with the school's investigation as much as possible. The school will potentially want to do their own investigation. They for sure will want to do their own investigation. They potentially will want our input. We want to make sure that we are cooperating with them as much as we possibly can. We need to take into consideration things like, where did this happen? Where did the sexual harassment take place? Was it on school property? If it was, then the school will be able to do their own policies with that situation. If it did not take place on school property, then there might be some different things that the school will be able to do or not. And so our Rotary Investigative Committee will also have to join in with that when needed. We have to take into consideration things like, were there multiple schools involved? For example, RILA, there are multiple schools. Our annual interaction that involves multiple schools with multiple students from different districts. And so we'll have to make sure that every school that is involved is aware of what happened and could potentially do their own investigation if needed. If at any point there is any behavior, excuse me, if at any point there's any behavior that would cross legal lines, we would absolutely need to make sure that the correct authorities are aware. We would notify the police if necessary. And we need to just make sure that students know that we take this kind of thing seriously. This is not a situation that we want to let go without a serious investigation of what actually occurred.
Chelsea, a quick thought. There's a comment in the chat that a Rotary Club is not an investigative body. We should report, and you've already alluded to it. The investigative committee you mentioned is described in the policy. Once you've had a chance to read that, you'll have a better feel for it, but that is done at the district level. But it does, as the comment in the chat implies, means that the club has to report this promptly. And I would underscore the fact that if it involves criminal conduct, then the first reporting is done to the appropriate police agency from Rotary's perspective. And we then do not interfere with that investigation, although we may have to and probably will have to do our own.
Thank you for that clarification, John. I see another couple of comments, things like document their statements. Absolutely, documentation is extremely important. And then what if there's a school-sponsored event that's not on school property? That is something that your school's going to have policies on. As we've said, our Rotary Investigative Committee will be investigating no matter where the incident occurs. We just may have to work with a school's investigation as well. So then it would be the school and their policy regarding whether they would do an investigation for something that happened off of school property. However, if it is a school-sponsored event, I would imagine that most schools would do at least some kind of investigation to an event that would occur, or to an incident that would occur at an event that would be school-sponsored no matter what.
And it may also help if you look, I believe, at page 22 of the policy materials that are online. There is actually an incident report there that would give you help in figuring out what it is you really need to know.
Thank you again, John. Okay, Ryan, I think we
All right.
are ready to move on
Yeah.
to scenario 3.
Thank you, Chelsea. So at this point, our committee chair, John Reyes, is going to lead us through scenario number 3 and additional opportunities that may arise and how we would address them.
Thanks, Ryan. Frankly, this scenario is a thinly veiled rewrite of something that actually occurred that we encountered and had to deal with. But scenario 3 is at the conclusion of a Rotary event involving youth. Transportation is being arranged for various students to return home. Unfortunately, one of your fully trained volunteers has become ill and must now leave. The only alternative transportation available is with a club member who is not qualified for activities involving continual contact. And you might insert the phrase there, unsupervised contact, because that's what's actually in the Ohio Revised Code. Is it possible for you to supervise this transportation and allow the volunteer to transport? If so, what steps would you take? You may have thoughts on this. This can arise in a variety of formats. One thing I suggest, well, I'm looking for anything to show up in the chat. If you see something, Ryan, that I've missed, let me know. You do want to check the manual itself, the policy of procedure. I believe on page 13, you have some input on club and youth-sponsored travel. You, of course, would look at your definition of casual contact and continued contact while you're at it. And there's also some sections on volunteer training and selection that are pertinent as you would plan. I see a reference to contacting the parent. Yes, that you contact the parent to see if they can come and transport. Maybe they'll give permission for a different form of transportation than we would prefer. There's some risk in that, but you do have to get the student home at some point. And I see a comment, never allow a youth to be transported by an adult. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't work because some of these youth are too young to drive, for instance. So you do have to have a protocol to deal with that. That's where the continuous contact volunteer comes into place as you look at your activities and what you do. The standard of care for that is you would have to have somebody that has gone through that entire vetting process, including the background check, if for some reason they're going to be transporting a student without a second adult. The preferred method, of course, would be to have two adults whenever you can. There's another question, are we, I assume the club or the district, responsible or liable for who may bring the youth to the event if they aren't a member? And the answer to that is, in many situations, no. If a parent or a guardian brings the student to the event, we're unlikely to have liability. However, there are a number of activities, particularly with some interact clubs that I'm familiar with, where parental transportation is very difficult to come by. And if you have to rely on that, the event may not occur. So it gets to be a bit complicated. See if the youth can get a ride with another youth who is driving. Candidly, I would not recommend that. That would not rise to the level of the safety that we're responsible for. If it happens and we're not aware of it, well, that's life, but it shouldn't be organized that way for us. Another thought or question for you to think about, can you use technology to assist you in this process with the existence of iPhones, cameras, and what have you? That is a somewhat unexplored area, but one that we probably won't be able to ignore in some situations. When I first encountered this, frankly, I was a soccer coach, and I remember being trained at the time and being reminded that, well, you just can't leave the youth standing on the soccer field and go home and tell them, too bad, you can't transport them. You have to arrive at some resolution along the way. I don't know if you want to take a quick look at some of the points. We'll move to the next slide. But generally speaking, no, there isn't one answer, and there isn't a perfect answer. You do want to analyze your events and transportations in advance. You can avoid many of these problems if you've looked at this ahead of time, if you have some extra capacity for transport in case something goes wrong, and it often does. We do need to recognize that difference between the continued contact volunteer and the casual contact, because we do need to try to meet our own standard of care of making sure there's no unsupervised contact with someone who hasn't been through the full process. The policy itself really does mandate no unsupervised contact. So whenever possible, we do need to meet that requirement. So you're going to be looking for ways in this scenario. Can you find a second volunteer? Is there some other way to try to make this work? Ryan, I think that's where I would stop, unless there's something else that's.
So, John, one of the questions brought up in the chat was, could Uber be substituted?
If you're dealing with a minor, my answer to that would be no. I would not be comfortable with that. I'm not usually that direct as a lawyer, but no, I would not do that.
John, one of the questions that was brought up actually earlier in the chat, the question was raised on page 16 of the policy, and this is in reference to best practices. One of the questions is like, don't make apologies. And part of this is, as far as you're objectively handling things, but is there a good response as far as, and this isn't, it basically says not in every situation, but is there a reason why we wouldn't make apologies while we're investigating something?
Yes, that's insurance driven. Your insurance, and this one's easy to understand if you've ever had a car accident. Okay, your automobile insurance carrier will tell you don't apologize, don't admit fault. They do that because that prejudices their ability to defend a claim when it's brought to them. And if you do that, then the insurance carrier in most policies has the ability to say to you, sorry, you prejudiced our ability to defend this claim. We will not cover you. We will not defend you. All right. So that is the reason that's in there. It flies in the face of how Rotarians like to behave, but you have to exercise caution there, because ultimately, if something goes wrong, most unfortunately, if we are responsible, then part of what we really need to do is to be in a position to fix the problem if we're responsible for it. And that, unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon your point of view, involves money. And that's where the insurance comes in. So the insurance carrier, frankly, has a lot to say about that.
Do we have Bob with us? I know he was having some technical difficulties earlier.
Yes, you do have Bob.
All right, Bob, Grand Poobah, as far as very involved with Rotary Youth Exchange, key component of our committee. Going to now turn it over to you to take us through the next steps as far as the next training components that we'll be rolling out.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I've gone by various nomenclatures during this whole process. I think I started out as Star to begin with Ryan, and now I'm Grand Poobah. But I want to tell you why that reference has some relevance, and that is because I've been in charge of the Rotary Youth Exchange for the district for some years now. And as a result, I was at the beginning of the use of a particular software that changed all of the youth exchange program from a paperwork process to a electronic process. And this has really been something brand new for the youth exchange, but little did I know that at the same time, when all of this was getting started for the youth exchange, some districts in Washington and California also extended the same kind of software, but not the same software, to youth protection, which for some time now, sometime after the year 2000, was a policy of Rotary as to pretty much zero tolerance for sexual harassment and sexual abuse. And consequently, they came out with a policy. And other districts quickly latched onto this to make it very much of an administrative process that could be monitored to make sure that everybody is qualified and trained as a proactive method of dealing with sexual harassment, sexual abuse. And so what we've done now is to involve ourselves with that same software that is being used in Washington and California. And that's my job today. My job today is to familiarize you with how that works, because it has a couple of benefits and the benefits would be, number one, Well, you need to know how in the club you interact with this system in order to make it work. And secondly, it highlights the kinds of things that need to be done as far as qualifications. It is a system that is quite detailed, and that's why I want to go down through it in detail. So Ryan, would you put up the first slide for better terminology, dealing with the flow chart for youth protection volunteer vetting process? And I would say that the idea behind this is to try to make this as simple as possible. And I think this flow chart arrangement does make it at least visually simple compared to me just referencing these things. Okay, we'll start at the top here. Basically, we all know that there are two particular categories of we would call a volunteer, although the second category, the casual contact volunteer, as opposed to continued contact volunteer, is really more applicable to the non-Rotarian that actually is volunteered to get into youth activities with the Rotary. That's a volunteer. The rest of that particular group happens to be all your club members, okay? And so the term volunteer there is, they volunteer to be a club member, but you will see, as we will talk later on, what the club member really needs to be aware of and what their duties are here. So what I'm going to concentrate on here first is for continued contact. That's the true volunteer. That's somebody who plans to really participate in the youth program of the club and or the district. So for this, what happens is that the club we are hoping will have appointed a youth protection officer. And if they haven't, then we've said that the president is unfortunately stuck with the buck stops here, and the president has to do the work of the youth protection officer. But the model is that there is a youth protection officer appointed. Then the youth protection officer then sends the youth protection officer actually updates the district in terms of telling us who those volunteers are for the club. We wouldn't have any other way of knowing, with the name, email, address, type of contact, of course, and that information will just be sent to the district youth protection officer, really. And so at the district level, then a generic email will be sent out to the volunteer. This starts the process out of qualifying that volunteer. What happens next is that the volunteer receives from this generic email a link to an application. The application is online, it's interactive. It's a form. And the volunteer fills it out. And many things are asked in that application, as will become obvious as I continue. But really that is the key of this whole process for a continual contact volunteer. Make out that application, and then it's submitted. And then in effect, it goes to the district, gets on the YVM system, which by the way stands for Youth Volunteer Management. And from there, both the district and the volunteer can work their way through qualification of that volunteer. So as you look at the chart, I'm going to, first of all, go in that chart, I'm going to go to the right immediately, because there's two things that can really happen from this. One is that a series of qualifications need to be done. That's on the right-hand side of this chart. And then on the left-hand side is the background check, which I will go into after I complete the right side. But the background check plus additional qualifications are what the volunteer needs to do to become qualified and therefore certified to work with youth. First of all, a YVM sends the email to references named in the application who complete the form report on the volunteer, and the district approves those reports. Basically, for explanation, this is once again an interactive form, and it's going to go to the references because in the application, the volunteer has to list references, people who will vouch for them, in effect. So that, and then the system will glean that information from the application and automatically send to the person to do the reference. We'll send them an interactive form to do that. And all they have to do is fill in the blanks. And, it'll ask them questions like, is this person suitable to do this, suitable to do that? What is your opinion of, and so forth. And I noticed that John has put on here, the link to the application is not available yet. And that's quite true. We can discuss this after the fact, but what we're introducing you here to is something that is now in effect in Washington, California, but we are still building up the system to garner their forms and get the operational system rolling. So then the YVM sends an email to the club YPO to do an interview with a link to the form report, and the district approves the report. Well, what is this interview? This is something that is like what the Youth Exchange does for host families. And basically, it's the YPO or designee has to actually physically interview the volunteer and put in the blank form, put in answers to the questions asked. And basically, once again, it's sort of like the reference report. What does this person exhibit these sorts of traits, and blank, blank, blank. And that way we have a direct way of finding out whether or not this person is really qualified to be a volunteer working with youth in terms of youth protection. And then the YVM sends to the volunteer to take the youth protection training course. Performance results are sent to the district and must have a passing score. Well, the North American Youth Exchange Network, which is an overall youth exchange authority for United States, Canada, and Mexico, has developed excellent training videos. And so Washington and California have utilized these training videos on the subject of youth awareness, youth protection awareness. And so that particular training course will then be offered to the volunteer who must take it, and it will be a direct training course. And so what we're doing here is basically making sure that all the volunteers do have this basic training on what are the necessities of youth protection, what is harassment, what is abuse, examples of same, how to protect minors, so forth and so on. And then there is an interactive test where you have to show that you paid attention to it. And then we have, at the end of that, they have the NAEN course automatically scores it and passes that information on to the district. And we'll then be able to see whether you passed or not. If you didn't pass, you have to keep taking it until you pass. Okay, that's just a qualification that works for the youth exchange. It works for, and it's going to work for volunteers. Now, there's some question here that has also come up on the chat, talking about the casual contact club members and whether or not they have to take training course. I'll get to that later, okay? And what that means and what the practicalities of that are and so forth. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But for the true volunteer, the one who's going to work with youth on a continual basis, that's the person for sure at 100% has to pass this course in order to become qualified. And so now we're going to hop up back to the beginning for the continued contact, where they have a link to the application. Okay. And then the application then sends out, we can go down a little bit more now, Ryan. Yeah. Then sends the volunteer for a background report. Now, a link. So the volunteer is going to actually handle the input of his or her own information, which is essentially confidential, to identify themselves for a third-party background check corporation. And we use IntelliCorp for the youth exchange. I think everybody out in the West Coast uses IntelliCorp. I think they're probably the biggest that I know of, who does these confidential background checks. Now, what's going to be checked is not your credit or anything like that, which is often done by employers and so forth. It's basically a criminal background check. And then to see also if you've had any reports of sexual harassment, abuse that have made it into the criminal aspect of it. But of course, if you have committed a felony or something like that, then obviously you're not going to make it through the background check. But again, whether you make it through the background check or not, even if you may have something questionable in your background, you still could be approved if the district looks at it and simply says, well, that's got nothing to do with the subject at hand. And it doesn't do anything about your character dealing with youth or something relevant. But again, if it's criminal, chances are it probably will. But again, you don't have to be worried about somebody checking into your credit or that sort of thing. So if the report comes back without a clear, if it comes back clear, that means no problem. Then, you've done that requirement. But if it comes back with something that it marks like review, that's for us to review, then we know there's something wrong. We go back and review it. But at the same time, a pre-adverse letter is sent to the volunteer who's saying that, you've got an adverse report here. Please respond in 10 days. If you don't respond, well, you'll be dinged. If you do respond, then we'll use that information to do a final review to determine whether or not you're qualified. So basically, with all those things in mind, going down to the bottom, if we can, on the chart. Okay, you'll see that the end product for both the background check and all these three other items that are qualifications, if all approved, the YVN system will mark the volunteer's record approved, and that's pretty much automatic if you pass all these requirements. And the volunteer is eligible to work with youth. We'll notify, and you're good to go. But that is essentially the process then for the continual contact. Now, over on the other contact type person, which is the club member who just basically is around while something's going on, as far as the youth are concerned, and also for non-Rotarian volunteers who are just around. I would also say that it's possible for a non-Rotarian to be a regular volunteer with continued contact, in which case they have to go through the whole vetting process I just described. But these are for people who are there on a sort of a temporary basis, who have some interaction with youth. And so, and if you plan to do anything with youth, that simply means that you're going to have to have qualifications of your club to have club members participate in that event. And so, and really the object here is, since we realize that most clubs probably do something with youth, this is pretty much a across the board requirement. What it is actually sort of a short type requirement. Basically, it's just this: the district has to be informed as to who your club members are. And so what we've done so far is that Club Runner inputs into the system who your club members are. And we're going to be asking, until we go to a better system, which will come, we're going to be asking the YPOs in each club to send us updates, like who's become a member and so forth, plus send us updates on what non-Rotarian people will be working with youth on a casual basis. That needs to be reported to us. Once again, just like the continued contact volunteers, the club YPO updates both volunteer lists to the district, name, email, type of contact. That's what has to be given to us on an updated basis for your club and for non-Rotarian casual contact people. So when that happens, then the district will automatically send your club member or non-Rotarian casual volunteer a link to that same youth awareness training course given out by NAN. Yes, they have to take it. And yes, they have to pass it. Now you're going to, undoubtedly what you're saying to yourself immediately is, well, we're going to lose a lot of club members because nobody's going to want to do this. Well, not true. What happens is that the Rotary policy, the Rotary International policy, is that you have to make the training course available to all your club members. You have to make it available, give them the opportunity to take it. And for the non-Rotarians, it's that opportunity that qualifies you as a club, essentially, to work with youth. Now, that doesn't mean that this is a pro forma deal, and that all we want to do is to throw that out. Everybody can take it, nobody does. Not true. Our goal is 100% of the people take it and pass it. We do know that incrementally, the percentage that do is going to increase each year that we do this, okay? And so we are going to do it. And my understanding is currently, this is sort of an annual requirement, that we're going to make sure that these people at least report to us that they've done it. And as the percentages grow, we're hoping that we're going to get eventually to a near 100% figure. We understand that that's a process. So without dwelling on this point, we're just letting you know what our goal is. But the important thing for you to know as a YPO out there is that you have to make the opportunity to take this course available to everybody. Okay, so, and encourage everybody to make sure that they take it. So that addresses pretty much the casual contact people, even though that sounds like a real challenge. It has been a challenge out on the West Coast, but their percentage of people taking it continually rise. And they're doing pretty good by now, but then again, it's been in process for a number of years. I would also mention that there are special programs like the Tall Ships program in Cleveland, Also Interact is in the way a special program. RILA is a special program, but run through the district. So that will have its own modification in terms of the system reporting. But it's going to, each of these kinds of things are going to be sort of a separate file in our reporting system. That doesn't mean that we are necessarily changing the requirements. It's just that the reporting of the same is going to be, let's say, tweaked in order to fit these various different kinds of programs. So you don't have to worry, but just stay tuned, because these special programs will be part of the system, but we're not going to make it so that it's impossible to do either. So with that in effect, I will tell you that because I've been told that this is something we have to emphasize, that for instance, in Interact, where you're involved with a school, you have to realize that taking this particular course does not, the course today that you're taking with us, that's not the NAN course, but the course you're taking with us today does not qualify you to be a volunteer. Okay, we want to make sure everybody understands that. This is a rollout, so you understand what's going on. This course, the stuff, just taking this course this morning does not qualify you to become a volunteer. And it doesn't even qualify you to be a casual contact volunteer. Okay, so just be aware that that's a fact. Also, I'm also told that I must notify you all that if we're dealing with something like Interact and the teacher comes to you and says, well, I've taken the background check for the school, and so that should be good enough. No, it's not. Our requirements are standardized, so we can make sure that everybody's got what we believe are standard. So yeah, for instance, that teacher is going to have to go through the same background checks as everybody else in the program, our program, in order to qualify for the Interact program. So with those two, I'm going to, with those two modifications or emphasis, I'm going to go on to what we believe would be a hope for the future. And that is that our eventual goal is to make sure that the youth as well in these programs are trained in youth awareness, youth protection awareness. We can do that. The system is being worked on right now with our partners on the West Coast, so that we can develop a software to make sure that even the minors are in these programs are trained on how to protect themselves and not to get in trouble with other youth. This involves a lot of difficulties because of privacy issues and involvement with the school and so forth and so on. But we are attempting to master those problems. So look in the future, although not right away, that we will be expanding this to making sure our youth are well trained as well. I want to tell you right now that certainly the inbound youth on Youth Exchange are all trained in this. So this is a way of catching up our youth protection program to all of our youth, which is something that we've done with the exchange youth for, well, years and years and years. That being the case, I just want to quickly, Ryan, if you would put up the volunteer monitoring, administration, and training summation form there. Just want to go and give you a brief summary of what your basic responsibilities would be. And we'll make this available to all anyway. First of all, the responsibilities of the district YPO, that's us. Operate and maintain the YVM system, evaluate applications, references, interviews, and background checks, monitor the progress of volunteer on the YVM system, receive monthly invoices of all BGC billed charges, for instance, like the background checks, Report Bill BCG charges to each club and district treasurer. That's just a very brief summary, but just give you an idea of what we're in charge of in the system. And as you notice, the district is taking on a lot of the review and monitoring of this process. Some years down the line, like the West Coast, much of this may be delegated to the clubs to do various functions so that the clubs themselves can assume more of the duty here. And then the responsibilities of the club YPO volunteer vetting. This is very cursory, but I think it does cover immediately anyway, as we get rolling, what you have to be worried about. Update district by listing active club continued volunteers and casual content volunteers, which we talked about. Interview and report on volunteer applicants. Okay, in other words, the YPO has to, or to have a designate, do that interview, which we've already gone over. And then finally, track the status of club volunteers, which information will be made available to them in some form, to the YPOs in some form or another. And eventually, I'm sure they will have their own portal, a way of getting into the youth volunteer system, where they get a limited amount of information, but relevant to them, not the whole bunch of data, but what's relevant to them so they can monitor what's going on. So with all that said, I think I'm done, but I know we got a bunch of questions there. So John, how do you want to handle those questions? Oh, by the way, by the bottom there, I just note that Rotary Youth Exchange has its own requirements for vetting volunteers and its own software. So they'll operate pretty much on their own, but a lot of the data that goes into the Youth Exchange system will be automatically input into the youth volunteer management system. So there's not a lot of double work going on. Okay, I'm done. John, how do you want to handle the questions?
Well, we are at this point over time. So if folks have to leave, they are free to do so. And I believe that our subcommittee group will stick around and we will attempt to work through at least some of these questions. I'm also available to speak to clubs one-on-one and have done one and have several more lined up. And there's a question, is international or the district, I'll take one, providing any of the funding for this. Actually, the district has already incurred well over $5,000 of expense that it has paid for in working with this system. So the answer is yes. As we see it now, the only expense that would filter down to the club level is the cost of the background check. The rest is being borne to the extent we know that it exists at the district level.
John, we got several questions in the chat in regards to just being able to see as far as these handouts, these slides, these documents, things like that. We are recording this session. We'll make that available. But in addition, Fran slides, the scenarios, will those be up on the district website?
We can work with Cheryl. I mean, you're going to see them if you review this, but to the extent possible, we'll try to get those up on the district website as well.
I've also just put them into the chat box for anyone who would like to download them.
Yeah, I see Steve Zaber asked for that. It's a good idea. Some of these questions, and Ryan, if you want to group them and pop them in here, go ahead. Some of them are complex. One references, we have school leaders in our club. They have contact with youth more from their jobs than membership position. Could we be liable with the club? Well, the answer to that is, who knows, right? That's where it gets complicated. What level of Rotary Club involvement would it take to generate liability? I can't give you that answer in the abstract. I mean, generally speaking, the less involved the club is, the less likely there is to be a liability. Is it actually a school event and a Rotarian just happens to be there is one thing. So those you just kind of have to look at on a case-by-case basis. But if it's primarily the school, it's probably school liability. To be candid, I've seen situations where lots of people get sued. drowning incident. I saw the Metropolitan Park District get sued. I saw the group that brought the children in get sued. I saw individual lifeguards get sued. And then unfortunately, you have to sort it out. And frankly, that's where your insurance comes into play, because it generally pays for the lawyer to do the work to work your way through that.
John, we had several questions in the chat in regards to just, I don't want to say evaluating new prospective members as they join clubs, as far as their background and things like that.
Right. That's a very interesting question. And it's one that we are youth protection, right? We do not have the mandate to deal with every new member who comes in. I can tell you what we have learned in this process is that many clubs who are involved in all of this do background checks on every prospective new member and reject those members who don't get a clean report. This policy doesn't technically require that. It requires a background check only for someone who's going to have continuous contact with youth. And you need to look at those definitions because frankly, I suspect there may be a disagreement between the two lawyers on this subcommittee over how many people need to be run through a background check for continuous contact. All right. That requires some analysis because it is not inherent that every member of a Rotary Club is realistically going to have continuous contact, even in a club like Akron where we sponsor a camp. In my experience, probably 85% of the club has minimal to no contact with the camp that would require that kind of background check. So to come back to the direct question, this policy does not require that every new member be checked. Clubs we are finding are doing it, but that is a club by club or a district by district policy. Ours has not adopted one yet that requires a universal background check for any new member.
Thank you, John. So today we are wrapping up our session on youth protection. This is just a step in the process. So we are asking clubs right now to have a youth protection officer identified. That's the key step. And as those individuals are identified, or if it's the club president, we will be rolling out additional information and trainings in the next steps from here as those become available. You have a lot of great resources at the district level. The policy is very inclusive, but you also have individuals on the youth safety committee who are resources to help you as you move forward and as you ask questions. Ultimately, the goal here is to protect our youth and also to help protect Rotary in doing the right thing. So we thank you for your time. This concludes our session. If you'd like to stay behind and ask some individual questions, a few of us will be available here. But thank you for your participation this Saturday morning.